While the jury is taking its weekend break from deliberation in the Brian Walshe murder trial, I want to talk about the fruit of the poisonous tree argument that Brian Walshe's lawyers made before the trial began. His lawyers wanted to exclude some of the most damning evidence that Brian Walshe killed and dismembered his wife and then lied to police about it. They had argued that the location data and the search history on Brian's phone was not legally obtained. And I've had a few comments like this one essentially saying that they're worried that if Brian Walshe is found guilty, which we can all hope will happen, that they're worried that a guilty verdict could be overturned on appeal because of the way that the police ignored the ADA's and Brian's lawyer's agreement to limit the phone search to just communication between Brian and Anna. That it could be a fruit of the poisonous tree situation. In a typical criminal investigation, the police will follow a trail of evidence that leads them to more and more evidence. The fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine basically says that if any part of that trail of evidence was obtained illegally, that any subsequent evidence that was found as a result of the illegally obtained evidence will not be admissible. And in Brian Walshe's case, the judge ruled that not only was the police search of Brian Walshe's phone above board, but also even if it wasn't, inevitable discovery applies. Essentially, Brian Walshe had argued that he only consented to have the communications on his devices looked at and not the search history or location data. But the Commonwealth countered that Brian consented to a full data extraction and examination of the two devices for the time frame of December 25th to January 6th. This is for Brian's cell phone as well as Brian's child's iPad. This is easier to explain with a calendar, but this text is going to be too small, so we're going to zoom in a second, don't worry. But it's important that you know that Sunday, January 1st was the last day that Anna was seen. We now know that this is the day that Anna died. The 4th was the day that Anna's employer called in a well-being check to the Cohasset Police Department. They came and interviewed Brian, and he gave his version of events. And the next day, on Thursday the 5th, the officers asked for consent to search Brian's phone. This is the transcript of that January 5th conversation between Brian Walshe, Trooper DeChico from the Massachusetts State Police, and Detective Schmidt from the Cohasset Police. DeChico's name might sound familiar if you followed the Karen Reed case. He was in the text thread with disgraced, dishonorably discharged ex-trooper Michael Proctor, where he was saying disparaging things about Karen Reed. Anyway, during this conversation, DeChico, in my opinion, is being clearly manipulative. It's not illegal for the police to manipulate people, or lie to them, for that matter, or mislead them. He says, I know you said you're willing to do, whatever you can to help the investigation. We thank you for that. I'm trying to understand Anna. I think if you would allow us to look through your phone and consent to us downloading your phone and seeing some of the communication between you and her, I think it'll help us really create a permanent timeline of the events. And Walshe is like, to be clear, you want to download everything that's on my phone. And he's like, yes, but what we're focusing on, though, is what we're interested in. Yes, download everything, but what we're interested in is locating Anna and finding the information specifically in there that would help us do that, the Anna-specific content. And Brian's like, okay, I'm willing to do that, but I do want to talk to my lawyer in advance. You can pause to read this page. Chico keeps the pressure on. All that we're interested in. We'd be interested in your communication with Anna and the dates of, the 31st through the present. We're not interested in your other past or your other issues. I'm not a legal expert, but talk to your attorney, but I believe that it would require a search warrant for all that stuff to be used against you, and that's not what we're looking to even go into. Detective Schmidt also interjects to facilitate getting the extraction. Just so you're aware, if it's of any peace of mind, like we don't even have a crime, we're not investigating a crime, this is a missing person. You can pause to read this page too. And Walshe is like, no, I'm only interested in finding Anna. Simultaneous to that interview taking place, Sergeant Buchanan and Detective Lopes were interviewing Brian Walshe's mother, Diana Walshe, as well as their 6-year-old son. And yes, that is the same Buchanan that is being currently sued civilly by Karen Reed alongside Brian Tully and deplorable, disgusting ex-trooper Michael Proctor. Brian's 6-year-old son stated that he heard a noise early in the morning of January 1st. At the time of this filing, Brian Walshe had not yet pleaded guilty to disposing of his wife's remains in various dumpsters and lying to police about it. We have since learned that Brian admits that Anna was deceased sometime very early in the morning on January 1st, which means all of this information repeated by the oldest child is not true. I do not know if this is Brian Walshe manipulating the child into believing something that happened on a different day, if he planted a false story, if the child just came up with this on their own. He is 6 after all. But be aware of that as we go through this section. When he came downstairs, he saw Anna on the couch underneath his blanket, which he left there overnight. Anna was wearing pink pajamas with hearts. The oldest son saw the iPad on the kitchen island and picked it up. He realized the iPad wasn't working and handed it to Anna to fix it, and she did. Anna went upstairs and came downstairs wearing her real clothes, carrying a brown duffel and a purse. He believed that Anna's taxi was at the house. He told his mother that he loved her, and she responded, I love you more, and she left. Buchanan asked the boy where his mother was, but before Buchanan could finish the question, Diana interrupted him and began flailing her arms and interjected the words, your mother's cell phone to replace your mother. Okay. He responded that his mother wanted to bring him down to Washington, D.C., and then abruptly got up and ran to another part of the house. Trooper Keefe had also gotten cell phone records from Verizon themselves, like not from somebody's device, and and he determined that the last time that Anna's phone contacted a cell tower was at 3:14 in the morning on January 2nd, and that cell tower was near the Walshe residence. And again, this is a problem because at this point, Brian's story is that Anna left by Uber at 6 a.m. on the 1st and went to the airport to fly to work. So on the 5th, DeChico had asked for that consent search of Brian's phone. Brian said, "Let me talk to my attorney." And the next morning, Brian goes over to his attorney's house. And for several hours, Brian and his attorney review the iPad and his cell phone before they give police consent to search them. Overnight on the 6th, Keith began the extraction of the devices, and by the 7th, they began reviewing the data. And they realized that just before 5 a.m. on January 1st, Brian was searching on how to dispose of a body. Also, there were numerous searches on January 2nd on body disposal, removal of smell, Cohasset dump, and cadaver dogs at dump. I don't think we heard about the cadaver dogs at dump search in court, but it's likely in the binder of Brian's internet search history that the jury gets to go through. At this point, they stopped looking at the files and got a search warrant for the device. At the same time that Garino and Keefe are reviewing the phone data, there are multiple troopers that are driving all over the place trying to confirm Brian's version of events. Brian had told police that he went to get milk and orange juice, that he had driven to his mother's home but got lost on the way to her house, and that he went to Whole Foods and CVS. And they had officers driving to CVS, Whole Foods, all over the place, and learned that he never went and did any of those things. And therefore, by that evening on the 7th, they believed that Brian had given them false information. Brian's lawyers had argued that the police misled him by telling him that they were investigating a missing person in the context of the police's community caretaking function, when in fact they were targeting the defendant. And the Commonwealth says that it was abundantly clear that the investigators intended to verify Brian's whereabouts. And I totally agree with this. They did repeatedly say they were making a timeline, and at one point Brian's lawyer even said thank God for the ankle bracelet as it would have his location data. So clearly they expected the location data to be obtained inevitably. As an aside, Brian's ankle monitor does not track location data. The ankle monitor only tracked when he left the proximity of the home and not where exactly he went after that. And that's because the reason he was wearing the ankle monitor was because of a art fraud. Art fraud. For non-violent criminals, they're much more worried about them fleeing the country or something, so if they're missing for like 24 hours, that's when alarm bells go off. The defendant also challenged the scope of the search, arguing that the Commonwealth exceeded the parties' agreement as to what would actually be reviewed. The closest they get to this is when DeChico says, "That's all we would be interested in. We'd be interested in your communications with Anna." This is why I said that DeChico is being manipulative, because this is a very wise choice of words. He's not saying we're only going to look at this. He's saying that's the only thing we're interested in. We're going to look at everything, but we're only interested in your communications. And one thing that's interesting now that we've seen this trial are the dates that this extraction covers. In court, Brian's lawyer kept arguing that the police didn't do a good job because they kept not looking before the 25th of December. The extraction was only done from the 25th of December through the 6th of January at the request of Brian's lawyer. There is no dispute that the parties' agreed to search time frame was December 25th through January 6th. Obviously, the judge denied this motion because we saw all this evidence in court. But here the judge explains about inevitable discovery. Even if the Commonwealth exceeded the scope of the agreed-to search of the electronic devices, the exclusion of the evidence obtained is not automatic. Evidence need not be excluded under the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, even if the government misconduct was a cause, in fact, of the discovery of evidence, if the government can demonstrate that the evidence inevitably would have been discovered by lawful means. In this case, the challenged searches and location data would have been inevitably discovered during the execution of the search warrant at the Walshe residence, during which law enforcement would have seized the defendant's cell phone, the iPad, and other electronic devices in the home. Even assuming that the police exceeded the scope of the consensual search, the information remaining in the search warrant affidavit provided probable cause to believe that the defendant misled the police in its investigation into Anna's disappearance, and that electronic devices that contained evidence of the same would be found in the Walshe residence. Simply put, there was already enough evidence on the search warrant without including any of the data from the consensual search. They already had Brian's false statements about his whereabouts. They had the oldest son describing Anna using his iPad, which would mean that there should be a record of the iPad being used at that time as he described. And they also had Brian's account of why he did not contact police to report Anna missing. Thus, discovery of the electronic searches and location data was certain as a practical matter. If Brian is found guilty, will he try to appeal on this and several other issues? I don't know, probably. But in this case, I do think the judge covered her bases. I agree with her reasoning for why the search was consensual and fine. And I also agree with her that even if it wasn't consensual, that they would have found everything else through inevitable discovery. That's everything I know about this. Hopefully this answered some questions people had. Love you guys. Drink water. Bye.